They say the land remembers. Every hoofprint, every shout, every secret buried under its soil. This ranch has seen it all. But nothing in its memory could have prepared it for the sight that met my eyes that blazing afternoon. A white silk tent, towering like a smug monument to entitlement, sitting right in the middle of my grazing field. I stood motionless at the edge of my own property, jaw tight, boots planted in dry soil that once belonged to my grandfather. Strings of fairy lights dangled lazily across the canopy like vines choking out the sun, and golden chairs sat in perfect military rows, facing an altar that had no right being there. Soft classical music wafted through the air, Mozart, maybe played by a quartet in tuxedos who probably didn't even know they were trespassing. I didn't move. Not yet. Because if I took one step forward, I might not stop walking until I ripped every fake flower out of the ground. Then, through the gauzy fabric of the tent, I saw her. Of course, it was her, Karen Whitmore, the HOA queen bee, the same woman who once tried to report my rooster to animal control for crowing too early. There she was, flouncing around in a pastel pink dress like a saccharine dictator, barking orders into a walkie-talkie and snapping her fingers at servers like they were stage props in her backyard fantasy. Her clipboard always present, always weaponized, hung from her wrist like a badge of royal decree. I should have known. I should have known it was her the second I saw the no trespassing sign lying sideways in the dirt, cracked and bent, like someone had stomped on it deliberately. I marched up the gravel path, fists clenched, ignoring the murmurs from guests sipping champagne as if they owned the view. I tapped a young caterer on the shoulder. He turned around, startled, napkin tucked into his apron. "Who gave you permission to be here?" I asked, calm but cold. He stuttered, the event planner. They told us this was the venue." And then, like a vulture spotting weakness, Karen swooped in. "Brad," she said, wide-eyed, like I was the uninvited one. "What are you doing here? You're ruining a very special moment." Her voice dripped with performative pity, the kind that makes you feel slapped even when she's smiling. "What am I doing here?" I echoed. "Karen, this is my land. My land. And you're hosting a wedding on it." She waved her hand dismissively, like she was swatting a fly. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just a couple of hours. You weren't using this side of the field today." I felt the rage bloom in my chest, slow and steady like a sunrise before the storm. "You told the board we'd be fine using it," she added, eyes narrowing. "What board?" I snapped. "This isn't HOA property. You know that." She rolled her eyes and offered a patronizing shrug. "Oh, please. It's all one big community. Be supportive for once in your life." That did it. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I simply turned around and walked. My boots crunched over brittle grass, past the broken sign, through the weather-worn fence, and straight into my barn. My barn, the place where I learned to weld, where Claire took her first steps, where every cow knew the sound of my whistle. I climbed the wooden rails and gave a single, sharp call. One whistle, that was all it took. They came like an army summoned by instinct, 27 cows, every one of them a veteran of these fields. They didn't need direction. They recognized every inch of that land like a heartbeat, tails swaying, heads bobbing. They marched toward the chaos. Champagne flutes crashed. Guests screamed. A flower girl shrieked as Daisy, my most curious cow, sniffed her basket of petals and decided it smelled edible. The groom tripped on a fresh cow pie and landed face first into a pile of white roses. The best man tried to guard the cake like a soldier protecting a fortress, but Bessie got there first, licking the frosting clean off the top tier and straight onto his suit. Through all of this, Karen stood in the center, paralyzed, her hands in the air as if conducting an orchestra of disaster. "Call 911, she screeched. "Someone call 911. But I was already back on my porch, arms folded, watching like a man who had waited 2 years for this exact moment. I didn't yell. I didn't laugh. I just smirked. A quiet, satisfied curl at the corner of my mouth. Because justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears hooves. And then, just as the sirens echoed from down the road, I said to myself out loud this time, this is just the beginning. Because it was. What they didn't know, what they couldn't yet understand, was that this wedding was never the real crime. This was the mask slipping, the symptom of a deeper rot that had been growing ever since Karen and her HOA cabal moved in next door. It began 2 years ago, when a group of developers turned the woods behind my ranch into a cookie-cutter suburb called Willow Creek Estates. White fences, gray roofs, manicured lawns that looked like they were trimmed by tweezers. And at the head of their HOA board, her, Karen, the clipboard queen, she didn't knock when she first came to my door, just barged up the driveway and said, "Your barn's color doesn't match the neighborhood aesthetic." That's how she introduced herself. Not with a name, not with a handshake, but with a complaint. I laughed in her face. And from that moment, we were at war. Noise complaints, smell reports, letters about unauthorized livestock activity. She tried everything. Even called the sheriff once because Claire's pet rooster crowed at 5 a.m. But every time the law sided with me. Why? Because I had the deeds, the permits, the proof. Henderson Ranch was not part of their HOA. I wasn't under their jurisdiction. But that didn't stop Karen. She wasn't interested in law. She was interested in control. And when she couldn't have it, she tried to shame, to intimidate, to break me. But she forgot one thing: this land raised fighters. My grandfather built it with bare hands and post-war bones. My father died defending it from creditors during the recession. And me, I came home from 2 tours in Iraq dreaming of peace. Not HOA battles. But when peace is stolen, justice comes in boots and barbed wire. That wedding was their first real mistake. Because now I wasn't just reacting, I was watching, planning. And when I saw Karen's niece's white dress, fake smile, standing under my oak tree like it belonged to her, I knew what I had to do. Claire saw the tent, asked, "Why are there chairs in Daisy's field?" And I told her the truth, because some people think they can take what doesn't belong to them. She tilted her head and asked, "Are you going to let them?" And just like that, the idea was born not out of revenge, but out of principle. They thought they could erase me. But you don't erase a man whose name is carved into the land. You just give him a reason to fight louder. So I let the cows loose. I let nature reclaim what was stolen. And when Karen called 911, I knew the officers would come. But I also knew this time they wouldn't be on her side, because the land remembers. And soon the world would too. The morning after the wedding, the fields still smelled like roses, frosting, and cow dung. I woke up early, as usual, not because I had chores to do, but because something deep in my gut wouldn't let me sleep. That sixth sense something every rancher develops told me that silence, when it follows chaos, doesn't mean peace. It means someone is planning their next move. Sure enough, by noon, there was a letter wedged under my gate. No envelope, just one sentence, typed in bold, all caps, like it was screaming from the page, "Your ranch is in direct violation of community coordinates. Cease all farming activity or face fines." There was no return address, but I didn't need one. It smelled like perfume and petty authority. Karen had started her next act. The ink was still drying on the chaos she caused yesterday, and already she was attempting to rewrite the rules of reality, rules that didn't even apply to me. I wasn't under HOA, I never had been. My ranch predated their development by 70 years. But logic didn't matter to people like Karen. Control did. And the more she lost it, the more dangerous she became. A few hours later, Claire came running in from outside, holding something with both hands like a sacred offering. It was a flyer, bright colors, bold font, and Karen's signature smug face printed in the corner. Willow Creek HOA presents Community Vision 2025. Beneath it was a mock-up map showing expanded buffer zones and shared agricultural experiences. And right there, smack in the middle, was the southern field of Henderson Ranch, labeled Future Community Garden and Recreational Green Space. My land, on their fake map. My hands trembled not from fear, but from insult. They were trying to absorb my ranch by pretending it already belonged to them. A psychological ambush. Turn lies into maps. Print them enough times. And maybe people start to believe, but not me. I'd seen enough propaganda overseas to recognize the tactic. That night, I drove around the perimeter of the ranch. I noticed new posts planted along the southern fence line, metal stakes with orange ribbons flapping in the wind like warning flags. Some of them had little plastic placards with QR codes linking to the HOA site. They were branding my land like it was a product on a shelf. I pulled them out one by one, snapped every single stake, and threw them in the bed of my truck. But it wasn't just symbolic anymore, it was strategic. Karen wasn't trying to annoy me. She was laying legal groundwork, inch by inch, like a termite infestation. And termites don't stop unless you smoke them out. 2 days later, the county office called. A clerk, polite but clearly irritated, said, "Mr. Henderson, we've received 3 anonymous requests for a zoning review of your southern parcel." My jaw clenched. 3, yes, she said, all within the last week. Apparently, there's concern from a neighboring HOA that your land may have been improperly categorized decades ago. Improperly categorized. That's HOA code for we want it. I asked for copies of the submissions. When I picked them up, I nearly laughed. They were full of words like communal viability, natural extension, and underutilized rural resource. They'd even included photos zoomed-in images of my cows grazing, labeled potential for sustainable urban farming initiatives. It was absurd, but dangerously clever, because to someone sitting behind a desk 40 miles away, all they saw were maps and paperwork. They didn't know the land. They didn't smell its soil or know which tree was struck by lightning in A7. They didn't know that Claire learned to ride her bike down the same dirt path Karen wanted to pave into a jogging trail. I realized then Karen's war wasn't just about trespassing. It was about rewriting the identity of this place. And if I didn't act, this ranch would be swallowed not by bulldozers, but by bureaucracy. That evening, I noticed drones again. Not one, but 2. Hovering silently, low over the barn and circling like vultures. I walked out with my shotgun slung over my shoulder, not raised, not aimed, just visible. They zipped away fast. But I already knew whose fingerprints were on the remote. Ron, the HOA's self-declared safety officer, a man who once flew his drone over my pond because kids might fall in. He never cared about kids. He cared about leverage, surveillance footage, aerial photos, angles they could manipulate to look like violations. I installed jamming devices the next day. Legal ones, just enough to disrupt hobby drone frequencies. I also replaced all my outdoor cameras with night vision ones. This wasn't just about seeing anymore. It was about collecting, documenting. I started building what I called the HOA file, a digital vault with every letter, every video, every recorded conversation, and yes, every violation they themselves had committed while accusing me of crimes. Claire helped. She labeled files, picked out background music for the videos, and even named the folder Operation Moo. I didn't have the heart to change it. Then came the garden stunt. One morning, I woke up to the sound of shovels. Not roosters, not tractors, shovels. I looked outside and saw a group of HOA members, Lisa, Tom, even Ron, digging in my field. They had matching gloves, sun hats, and t-shirts that said "Grow Together." Karen stood nearby holding a clipboard and megaphone, acting like some demented tour guide. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. I stormed out. Phone recording. "Get off my land," I said, voice low. Karen raised her megaphone and chirped. "Good morning. Brad, we're just prepping the soil for the new community herb spiral." She gestured to a chalk-drawn spiral on my dirt. "The board approved this as part of the 2025 Green Space Initiative." "I'm not on your board," I snapped. "This isn't your land. Let's not be divisive," she said sweetly. "We're all one big neighborhood. Try that line in court." I replied. Lisa dropped her trowel. Tom looked like he wanted to vanish. Ron, ever the bulldog, pointed at the chalk drawing and muttered, "Just think about how nice this could be for the kids." "My kid," I said coldly, "plays with cows, not kale." They left, eventually, but not before snapping more pictures, muttering about resistance to progress. I sent the footage to my lawyer, Chuck. He laughed so hard I heard him choke on his coffee. "You know what this is," he said. "They're trying to create a record of abandonment. If they show repeated use of the land and no legal resistance, they can build a claim of assumed access." "So what do we do?" I asked. "You hit them back. Legally, loudly, and publicly." That night, I uploaded a compilation video titled "This Land Is Mine." It was raw, unedited, just a mashup of everything they'd done, wedding crashers. flyers, fake zoning maps, and garden invasions overlaid with timestamps, and Claire's voice asking, "Why are they doing this to us, Daddy?" The internet exploded. Thousands of comments poured in ranchers, farmers, suburbanites tired of overreaching HOAs. Hashtags like #SaveHendersonRanch and #KarenCan'tFarm started trending. It wasn't about cows anymore. It was about principle. I didn't expect what came next. A local councilwoman reached out. "Mr. Henderson," she said, "we're looking into unauthorized HOA activity in your area. Would you be willing to meet?" And I did. The next morning, Karen found herself not at a ribbon cutting, but in front of county officials demanding to know why she submitted a zoning request for land that wasn't hers. She tried to deflect, bluster, even cried a little, but it was all performance, the kind that melts under sunlight. And as the walls started closing in, I stood back and watched, not with revenge in my heart, but with a fierce clarity. They tried to erase my land with paper. I answered with proof. They tried to shame me into silence. I handed them a spotlight, but something told me deep in the bones of the land that this was just the midpoint. Because when people like Karen lose power, they don't retreat, they double down. And sure enough, the next day, I found my mailbox smashed in, with a fresh for sale sign stabbed into my driveway. The message was clear: they wanted me gone. But what they forgot, what they never understood, was that I'm not going anywhere. This land isn't just mine. It's who I am, and I don't leave family behind. 3 days after the mailbox was smashed and the bogus for sale sign appeared on my property, I started sleeping with my boots on. Not because I was scared, because I was ready. There's a difference. Fear paralyzes you. Readiness sharpens you. And I knew now, with full certainty, that this wasn't a squabble about zoning anymore. This wasn't about HOA bylaws or even land control. This was personal. The air felt different. The neighbors, those who once waved half-heartedly as they walked their perfectly manicured dogs, now crossed the street when they saw me. Claire's school sent a notice home that someone had called in a concern about her emotional safety living on a conflict zone. That phrase, conflict zone, burned into my brain like an insult dressed in bureaucracy. Chuck said it was a play, another low-level tactic. "They're trying to isolate you," he told me, flipping through a manila envelope full of HOA letters with fake fines, false allegations, and threats dressed up as community concerns. "This is a psychological campaign, not just a legal one." And then he paused, reading the latest letter. "But this is new." I leaned over the table. The document was titled HOA Emergency Tribunal Summons. I laughed, bitter and sharp. "They're summoning me now." Chuck nodded, deadpan. "Apparently, you're being called to a special disciplinary review for violating neighborhood harmony." I didn't even ask what that meant. I knew it was nonsense, but Chuck's eyes didn't leave the page. "Here's the thing," he said quietly. "They've attached a petition, so signed by 53 Willow Creek residents." I froze. That number wasn't just names on a page. It was momentum. It was a signal that Karen had successfully sold the narrative to enough people that they felt empowered to enforce it, like neighborhood vigilantes with clipboards instead of capes. It didn't matter that my land wasn't part of their HOA. If enough people believed it should be, perception would start bleeding into reality. And that's when the fear, not for me, but for Claire, slipped in through the back door. That night, I checked every camera, reinforced every lock, walked the fence line with a flashlight until my boots were caked in dust. Around 2:13 a.m., one of the motion sensors pinged. I ran to the feed. Static. The screen flickered, then cut out. I sprinted outside, rifle in hand, heart hammering with a rhythm I hadn't felt since Baghdad. The barn door was open. That barn door never opened by itself. I burst through it, nothing, but the hay was scattered. My storage cabinet was pried open. One of the feed bins was overturned, and then I heard it. The silence. No mooing, no rustling, no Bessie or Daisy breathing behind me. The cows were gone. I ran to the backfield and stopped cold. Floodlights, metal fencing, a freshly installed gate with a laminated sign that read, "Willow Creek Community Livestock Experience Private Access." And inside, penned like zoo animals, were all 27 of my cows. My blood ran cold. Someone had trespassed, stolen my animals, caged them on my own land, and declared them part of some grotesque HOA petting zoo. And then I saw the locks industrial, silver, brand new. I pulled out my bolt cutters, but before the blades touched metal, a voice rang out behind me. Wouldn't do that if I were you. I turned. Ron, standing like a bad movie villain in a windbreaker and cargo shorts, drone hovering behind him like a mechanical vulture. You're trespassing. Ron, he smirked. Not according to this. He tossed a folder at my boots. Inside was a letter unofficial, unsigned, and plastered with fake legalese, claiming a temporary seizure of the buffer zone for neighborhood development testing. You know this is garbage, I growled. Maybe, he shrugged, but it buys us time. Time for what I snapped. For Karen's next move, he said, and then he walked off like he'd just delivered the final line in some community theater drama. I didn't cut the lock that night. I went home, tucked Claire into bed, then called Chuck. We're past legal now, I told him. They took the herd. Chuck was silent for a second. Then it's time to hit back with everything. The next morning, I uploaded a new video to the same YouTube channel that first aired my wedding fiasco. Titled My Cows Were Stolen by My HOA. Within 6 hours, it had over 400,000 views. Comments exploded. Journalists started calling. A retired sheriff from Tucson even left a voicemail offering to testify about Karen's past harassment in another county. But the internet wasn't the only one watching. That afternoon, I got a visit from a plainclothes federal investigator. Apparently, when minors are involved, and threats cross state lines, especially in viral media, it triggers interest at a higher level. He asked about the mailbox, the phony fines, the livestock seizure. I handed him the HOA file. He took it without a word, nodded, and left. That night, it escalated. Again. I woke to the smell of smoke. Not firewood, not barbecue, burned paint. I ran to the front gate and stopped dead. The ranch sign, my grandfather's hand-carved wooden sign that stood for 60 years, was burning, flames curling off the edges like claws, letters blackening into ash. Claire ran outside, barefoot, in pajamas. Daddy, she whispered, voice small. Why are they doing this? I didn't have an answer. I just grabbed the hose, killed the fire, and stood there as the sign crumbled. Later, I found spray-painted words in red across the barn. Next time, the girl. That's when something inside me broke. I wasn't dealing with HOA tyrants anymore. I was dealing with people who thought terror was a tool. The sheriff came within the hour. Deputy Wilkes, grim-faced, gun at his side, walked the perimeter, took photos, gathered ashes. Brad, he said, eyes dark, we're filing this as a criminal threat against a minor. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with clarity. I want this to end. I said, not with a settlement, not with a letter. I want it to end. Wilkes nodded. Then let's do it right. I sent Claire to stay with my sister that morning, packed her a bag, made it feel like a vacation. She hugged her unicorn plush and asked, will the cows miss me? I forced a smile and kissed her forehead. They'll be waiting for you. When she left, I turned my kitchen into a war room. Chuck arrived with paperwork. Matt and Jorge, two Army buddies now working private security, pulled up with surveillance gear. We reinforced the barn, installed thermal cameras, created a motion-triggered alert system tied to my phone. We weren't just defending anymore. We were preparing. The final move came at sunset. A truck pulled into the driveway. A man in a navy blazer stepped out and introduced himself as a reporter from Channel 4 News. We want to tell your story, he said. Not just about cows, about abuse of power, about families fighting to keep what's theirs. I nodded. Let's begin. That night, we filmed the first segment, Claire's drawings, the ashes of the sign, the footage of the cows being penned like trophies. And I ended with a single sentence: they came from my land, then my livestock, and now they threaten my daughter. But they picked the wrong ranch. The video went live at midnight. By sunrise, it had gone viral. Again, only this time there would be no more warnings, only consequences. By the time the sun rose over the blackened remains of the Henderson Ranch sign, the entire country knew my name. I wasn't just a rancher anymore. I was a man whose cows had become folk heroes, whose child had been threatened, whose land had been turned into a battlefield by an HOA that mistook tyranny for governance. The video we published, Karen's greatest hits, spliced with footage of burning wood and Claire whispering, "Are we safe here?" had crossed the million view mark by breakfast. The comments weren't just sympathy, they were fury. People were angry on my behalf. And that fire, unlike the one that took our sign, wasn't going out anytime soon. Channel 4 News released their full story by noon. The footage showed drone shots of the property, the fake signs, the garden plot invasions, and ended with a side-by-side clip of Karen smiling into a camera at her press event, "We Believe in Unity," followed by her screaming at officers as my cows trampled her niece's wedding cake. The public didn't just pick a side. They launched a movement. My inbox exploded with emails. Farmers from Nebraska offered to donate supplies. A vet from Idaho volunteered free checkups for the herd. A school teacher from Ohio mailed Claire a hand-painted book called Daisy the Defender. Donations poured in. I hadn't asked for them, but they came anyway. Someone started a GoFundMe titled Save Henderson Ranch, and within 48 hours, it passed 50 grand. I didn't touch a cent of it yet, but I printed every donor name and pinned them to the barn wall like family portraits. Meanwhile, Karen did what Karen always did when she lost control. She doubled down. She hosted a press conference from her backyard, flanked by her usual stooges, Tom, Lisa, and Ron standing stiff as tombstones behind her. Wearing a white blouse and sunglasses that covered half her face, she clutched a microphone and delivered her monologue like she was accepting an Oscar for Best Community Victim. "This man," she began, voice trembling on cue, "has manipulated media, endangered public safety, and continues to harass our peaceful neighborhood." I watched live from my laptop, sipping black coffee while Jorge rewired a camera above the barn. Karen continued, "The cows were weaponized. My niece is in therapy. Our reputation is in ruins. We will not be silenced by rural intimidation." It was theatrical, desperate, and completely tone-deaf. But then she did something new. She announced that the HOA was filing a civil lawsuit, $75,000 in damages. Emotional trauma, defamation, property disruption. A laundry list of half-truths and total fictions, typed in bold legal font and delivered like a death sentence. Chuck laughed when he read it. "This wouldn't survive 10 minutes in court," he said. "But she's not expecting to win. She's expecting you to panic, to settle, to run." But she didn't understand one thing: I'd already been to war. And this wasn't war. This was theater. And I knew how to perform. We filed a countersuit within 24 hours. Not just for trespassing and vandalism, but for false legal claims, emotional distress, and attempted land seizure. We included the video footage, the drone recordings, the burned sign, the threats, the tribunal summons, even the footage of Tom urinating behind the petting zoo tent. Chuck called that one Exhibit P. We sent everything to the county, then to the state, and then to the public. Again, the second documentary went live 2 days later. This one wasn't just a story. It was an expose. It included interviews with zoning officials, clips of Karen forging permits, testimonies from former HOA members who had resigned in protest. We called it HOA Hell the Ranch War. They didn't want you to see. It exploded. 3 million views in a day. Hashtags like #KarenGate, #Justice for Claire, and #DaisyStrikes back trended across platforms. Late-night hosts made jokes about cows breaking up weddings. A TikTok account edited Karen's 911 call into a dance remix. It hit #2 on viral charts. But underneath the comedy was a storm brewing. Reporters began showing up at Karen's door. Protesters, mostly young people from nearby towns, stood outside the Willow Creek gate with cardboard signs. "Land is not a playground. Power is not permission. Cows deserve better." Karen shut down her flower shop within 72 hours. Yelp was flooded with reviews like, "She sold me a bouquet of lies." Ron tried to post a defense video, but accidentally uploaded a clip of himself yelling at a Girl Scout selling cookies. Lisa stopped appearing in public entirely. Tom was caught trying to return the crowbar he'd used to rip down my fence. The HOA board began to fracture. Internal emails leaked by a disgruntled admin revealed infighting, blame games, and a desperate attempt to cover their tracks. But it was too late. The pressure was national, And then came the subpoena. Karen was served outside her mailbox by an officer who couldn't stop grinning. The look on her face was legend. The lawsuit would proceed to court, a real court, not a community tribunal. The charges were serious trespassing, property damage, illegal surveillance, and incitement of threats against a minor. Chuck and I reviewed everything again, double-checking. We wanted this airtight, no drama, just facts. But the drama came anyway. The morning of the first hearing, I found my truck smashed. Windshield caved in, spray-painted words across the hood, "Get out," and worse across the barn door again, this time in thick, dripping red paint next time. The girl, I called Wilkes immediately. He showed up in under 10 minutes. His face was tight. No jokes, no small talk. "Brad," he said, his voice hard as gravel, "this is now being escalated to federal jurisdiction. We've got a minor being threatened. We've got vandalism across state lines. And we've got digital evidence this was coordinated." "Coordinated?" I asked. He nodded. "We think she had help. People from other HOA circles. There's a network, apparently, online forums, private groups." I felt my stomach twist. A HOA syndicate. Wilkes didn't laugh. "Something like that. Claire was still staying with my sister. Thank God I couldn't let her see this, couldn't let her feel it. But I felt it. Every time I passed that barn, every time I touched the broken gate, every time I looked at Daisy and Bessie and the herd that had simply walked toward music, unaware they were about to become soldiers in a culture war. I took one last deep breath that night, and I filmed a third video. Not slick, not edited, just me, sitting on the porch, with the ranch behind me. I looked into the camera and said, "They've burned my sign, broken my gates, trapped my animals, threatened my daughter, but I'm still here, because this land is not just soil and fences. It's memory. It's legacy. It's home. And I won't be leaving. Not now. Not ever." I uploaded it, simple title, "Not Leaving." It became the most shared video of the month. And in it, I included one final line, one that burned into the hearts of everyone watching. When a HOA forgets its job is to serve, not to rule, it's time the people remind them who owns the land. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. And Karen, she had one move left. The court date was set. And for the first time in her life, she would stand not above me, not over me, not behind a gavel or a podium, but across from me, equal under the law. Only difference was I had the truth, and she had a clipboard full of lies. The courtroom didn't smell like justice. It smelled like old carpet, nervous sweat, and cheap paper. But as I sat there, boots clean, shirt tucked, jaw set, I wasn't thinking about the smell. I was thinking about Claire's drawing one she'd made the night before and tucked into my bag without telling me. It was a crayon sketch of our ranch, the new sign with purple hearts, Daisy with a flower crown, and underneath it all, 3 words in shaky handwriting, "Don't give up." I folded the paper gently and slipped it into my chest pocket. Across the aisle, Karen sat in a navy suit 3 sizes too stiff for her skin. Her sunglasses were gone this time. There was no hiding in federal court. Ron and Lisa flanked her like disgraced royals, their eyes darting everywhere except toward me. Tom was notably absent. Word was he'd cracked and gone fully cooperative with the investigation in exchange for immunity. The judge, a woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and the patience of a worn-out schoolteacher, called the session to order. And just like that, the war that had started with fairy lights on stolen grass reached its final battleground, not a field, but a courtroom. Karen's lawyer was slick, young, arrogant. He opened with a practiced tone, painting her as the victim of a rural extremist with a flair for digital manipulation. He said the wedding incident had sparked widespread ridicule, that Karen had suffered emotional distress and reputational harm, and that the entire conflict had been exacerbated by a social media smear campaign orchestrated by Mr. Henderson. My lawyer, Chuck, stood slowly. His boots weren't courtroom regulation, and his tie was crooked. But when he spoke, his voice cut through the air like a cleaver through bone. "Your Honor, what the plaintiff fails to mention is that this entire series of events was initiated by unlawful trespassing, false documentation, coordinated intimidation, and ultimately criminal threats against a child. He placed a thick folder on the judge's bench. This is not a case of defamation. This is a case of escalation. One side wanted peace, the other wanted control. For the next 4 hours, we walked through everything, every letter, every drone flyover, every unauthorized event, every photograph of fences cut, gates installed, livestock trapped. We showed the fake zoning maps, the planted signs, the tribunal invitations. Then we played the videos. Karen's face flushed crimson as footage of her screaming at police, barking at servers, and pointing at cows played on screen. At one point, she turned to her lawyer and hissed, "Turn it off." He didn't. The judge watched everything. Didn't blink, didn't interrupt. When the video ended on the image of my charred ranch sign, she finally spoke. "Ms. Whitmore, do you deny that this occurred on land you did not own?" Karen shifted. "I was led to believe, were you led to believe," the judge interrupted, "that it was appropriate to erect structures, install fencing, and trap livestock on private property. We had petitions." Karen stammered, "Community consensus. It was for the good of the neighborhood. This isn't about consensus." The judge replied, "This is about the law." Then she turned to me. "Mr. Henderson, you mentioned that threats were made against your daughter. Can you elaborate?" I nodded, slowly. I pulled the printed photo from my folder, the one of the barn door. Red spray paint slashing across the wood. Next time, the girl, the courtroom went silent. You could hear a pen drop. I handed it over. The judge stared at it for a long moment. "Do you know who did this?" "No, ma'am," I said, "but I know it wasn't cows." That earned a few stifled chuckles. Not from Karen. Her face had gone pale. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered something, but she swatted him away. The judge reviewed the rest of the evidence, then recessed for 30 minutes. When she returned, she didn't waste time. "The court finds in favor of the defendant, Mr. Henderson," she declared. "The plaintiff's claims are unsubstantiated, and in light of the evidence presented, the court is referring all materials to the district attorney for further investigation into potential criminal conduct by members of the Willow Creek HOA board." Karen's mouth dropped. Lisa whimpered. Ron stood up too quickly and had to steady himself. Chuck smiled without showing teeth. I sat still, not because I wasn't relieved, but because I wasn't done. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed. I didn't stop for interviews. I walked past the flashing cameras, through the crowd, and back to my truck. On the dashboard was Claire's second drawing, a new one. It was me, holding her hand, both of us standing under the barn stars. No cows this time, just peace. 2 days later, Karen was arrested, not just for trespassing or vandalism. The DA filed charges for filing false legal claims, property destruction, unauthorized use of zoning documents, and conspiracy to intimidate a minor. The arrest video went viral. Karen in handcuffs, screaming about community rights, blaming online harassment, accusing the system of bias. Ron and Lisa were both named in the indictment, but cut deals to avoid jail time. They provided emails, text chains, recordings. Karen had orchestrated everything from the fake permits to the late-night fence installations to the idea of using Claire as leverage. It was all there. Digital footprints don't lie. The HOA board was officially dissolved by court order. A new oversight committee, made up of volunteers from both the suburb and neighboring ranches, was formed to ensure that no HOA would ever again operate without full transparency or accountability. And me, I didn't celebrate. Not right away. The new sign took 2 weeks to finish. Claire and I carved it together. Same wood as before, rescued from the ashes, sanded smooth and sealed against time. She painted the H with little stars this time. I hung it at sunrise. Alone, the land was quiet. No shouting, no sirens. Just wind in the grass and the low, content hum of cattle grazing nearby. That weekend, we hosted a gathering, not a protest, not a spectacle, just a community meal. Farmers from 3 counties came. Former HOA members who'd had enough showed up with their families. One kid brought a homemade daisy plush. A local bakery donated cookies shaped like barns. We grilled ribs, danced in the dirt, and laughed under string lights that we hung only with permission. In the center of it all, Daisy stood proudly, wearing a new flower crown, letting toddlers pet her ears while someone played guitar on the porch. Claire, ice cream on her chin, whispered to me, "We got our home back." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yeah, baby," I said. "And no one's taking it again." That night, as the last car pulled away and the crickets returned, I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I looked out across the fields, still scarred, still healing, and felt something I hadn't in months: stillness. The kind that doesn't mean danger's gone, but that peace has finally drawn a line in the dirt. They came for my land. They tried to take my name. But they forgot something. A rancher's strength isn't in how loud he shouts, it's in how long he stands. And I stood, for Claire, for Daisy, for every inch of soil my grandfather carved from rock and storm. They lit fires. I built fences. They threatened. I documented. They lied. I endured. Because when the fight is for something real, something rooted, something you'd bleed for, you don't just win, you outlast.